Now we'll re-examine this letter grade and point grade lookup situation using the VLOOKUP function. The VLOOKUP function has a few more arguments. So you again has the lookup value. Now you need to tell the VLOOKUP function which table you have the lookup vector and the results vector. Here we have a fairly small table, so I just choose this I3 through J16. The next thing you need to tell Excel is in which column will you pick the results from. Here we have a small table with 2 columns and the results will be coming from the second column, so I just say 2. Okay, the last option here, the range lookup, anything that's shown as in square brackets is optional argument. So let's first try to see if this will work without choosing that. I get 88 to be a B plus, and if I copy paste, again I'm getting the errors because I don't have the absolute referencing, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that this is absolute reference by pushing F4. Now I get everything correctly. Now given the letter grades, the next thing I want to do is get the point grades. Again, let's try to use the VLOOKUP function. I have the lookup value, the table array here. I'm going to use my F4 to fix that, and then I know that the results will be coming from the second column, and then I hit enter. B plus is 3.3, that's good. Let's copy paste this. Now if you look at the D, again we are having the same problem we had in the lookup function. For those of you who have watched the lookup function, D should be a 1, but D is getting a 1.7. So just like the lookup function, the VLOOKUP function with no additional arguments assumes that the first column, the lookup column, is sorted in ascending order. But in this case it's not. Well, the cool thing about the lookup function, you can actually bypass that. You don't have to sort the first column, the lookup vector, in ascending order. Here's what you do. You say to Excel, I'd like to have an exact match instead of an approximate match. If by default this fourth argument is true, and which gives you an approximate match, and if the lookup column is not sorted properly, you won't get the right answer. But if you go and say false here, which is not the default option, but you have to actually specify it, let's see what happens. I copy paste this. As you can see, if you look at a D is a 1, a D is a 1. So here's what happened here. When you choose, let's go back here and choose false again. When you choose false as your lookup option, the fourth argument, what Excel does is, instead of going in order and trying to get you an approximate match, it goes through the entire lookup column and find an exact match for each value. So this is good for two things. One, that way, once I choose false, I know that it won't give me an approximate match, it will give me an exact match. And so I don't need to sort this lookup column in ascending order. The other one is more crucial. Let's say there was a situation, or let's say I'm looking for an E. Well, if I look for an E, if I didn't have false here, let me show you what happens. So I'm going to go here and make this false a true, which is a default value. So I have an E here and I get a 0.7, but if you look at my table, there is no E here. So I shouldn't be getting anything here. I should actually be getting an error. And if you use the lookup function or the VLOOKUP function with the true argument as its fourth argument, then you will always get an answer for anything. But if you choose to use the VLOOKUP function and choose the false argument for the fourth argument, then you will get not available, which is great. In this particular example, we quickly see that there is no E here. But let's say you were trying to look up products, and let's say you have transactions where you have maybe hundreds or thousands of transactions, and you have again hundreds of products. Then if your product names are not properly maintained, you may have a product here that you had a transaction for, and that product name may not be kept in your database, and the false option of the lookup function will actually help you identify that inconsistency between the two sets of product names. And that comes in very handy again when you deal with large sets of data. So let's copy paste so we don't have any problems. So lookup function and VLOOKUP functions are more or less interchangeable, but in practice I prefer the VLOOKUP function to the lookup function because of the features that I just told you about. One problem with the VLOOKUP function though is that it requires you, let's go and look at the arguments again. The VLOOKUP function has this table array thing which requires you to have a single table that contains your lookup vector and result vector. Whereas if you use the lookup function, let's look at the arguments of the lookup function again. In the lookup function, your lookup vector and result vector doesn't need to be in one table. They can be in separate places on the same workbook. They can be in different workbooks or worksheets, which gives you more flexibility. So depending on your situation, you may have to choose between lookup or VLOOKUP. You need to be careful. If you do everything right, they will give you the same results, but sometimes you may have to choose one over the other. Before we wrap up the lookup functions, as a quick review of the COUNTIF function, I wanted to show you one more thing. Let's say in this particular class, I wanted to see how many people passed the class, where the pass limit is 60. And again, since I only have 9 students here, I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them actually passed the class. But let's illustrate how the COUNTIF function would have been used. So I say COUNTIF, which we have already looked at before. In COUNTIF, you specify a range, and then you specify criteria. In the previous example, I had shown you that it's a single criteria. If I just choose G3 here, it will give me the value 0. What that's telling me is, in this blue range of C3 through C11, there is no value 60. But what I want is not values that are equal to 60. I want to see the number of values that are equal to or more than 60. So then I change my criteria like this. So instead of actually choosing one number, which was G3 or 60, I say in quotations, greater than 60. Your criteria should always be in quotations if it's not a single number. And I get that there are 6 values that are greater than or equal to 60. Now the problem with this particular way of writing this formula is that if I change the pass limit from 60 to, let's say, 70, I want it to be harsh that here, well, then I have to go here and change this one to 70 as well. So it's not really a live formula. I need to update the formula each time I change the pass limit. If I want the formula to be live, here's what I can do. Instead of writing the 70 inside the formula, I will actually do this. I will say, this is a criteria based on 2 texts. The first portion of the text is greater or equal to. The second portion is the value G3. We have already used how to use the ampersand function, which concatenates, which appends 2 strings, 2 texts to one another. Now I have a live formula. If I change this to 60, as you can see, C13 changes to 6. If I change this to, let's say I want it to be really harsh that semester and it changes to 80, then this goes to 4. In general, when you can, it's best to have Excel functions that are live, that can automatically update themselves, as opposed to hard coding numbers into your formulas. So that concludes our look at the lookup functions and our quick review of the countif function.